gospel reading comes from the Gospel of Luke today, where we hear an interesting story. And so Jesus says, "There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen, and who feasted sumptuously every day. And at his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who longed to satisfy his hunger with what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs would come and lick his sores. The poor man died and was carried away by the angels to be with Abraham. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was being tormented, he looked up and saw Abraham far away, with Lazarus by his side. He called out, 'Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I'm in agony in these flames.' But Abraham said, 'Child, remember that during your lifetime you received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner evil things, but now he is comforted here and you are in agony. Besides all this, between you and us a great chasm has been fixed, so that those who might want to pass from here to you cannot do so, and no one can cross from there to us.' He said, 'Then Father, I beg you to send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, that he may warn them, so that they will not also come to this place of torment.' Abraham replied, 'They have Moses and the prophets, they should listen to them.' He said, 'No, Father Abraham, if someone goes to them from the dead, they'll repent.' Jesus said to him, 'If they don't listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead.'" Let us pray. O Lord, may your words only be spoken and your words only heard. We do ask this all for your love's precious sake. Amen. Please be seated. Well, you're getting the B level preacher today, the second string. At 11 o'clock, the bishop is coming, Bishop Goff, and she really is a great bishop, great communicator. So if you're not doing anything after this service, hang around for the next one too. You'll like her. And if you can't make the next service, you certainly want to come back at 12:15 for the Italian feast, which is going to be an absolute wonderful time together. Some of the food started coming in. It looks delicious. You got to see the decorations in the hall. It'll be a great time. So join us for that. Today we wrap up our sermon series, the series which we've called Winning. It's not the main thing, it's the only thing, or is it? In this series, in the first week, we said there are some battles we absolutely, positively have to win. And the reason that we have to win these battles is not for our ego's sake, not to put another notch in our list of achievements, our achievement stick, not to make us feel better about ourselves, but we have to win these battles because if we lose them, somebody will suffer. Somebody we care about will suffer. Ultimately, the world will suffer. And so in everybody's life, there's just a handful of battles, 1 to 3 battles, that you just absolutely, positively must win. And we need to be crystal clear about what those battles are, and we need to make sure we have the resources to succeed in them. Second week, we talked about the behaviors that enable us to win in those battles, that there are certain behaviors that will enable us to win in the things that we said are most important. And when we talk about those behaviors, what we're actually talking about is values. Values aren't something that are irrelevant to life, but values are simply those things that enable us to achieve which is most important to us. And so again, it's absolutely critical that we take time to identify our values and that we make sure we're living a life consistent with our values. But very few people will ever give their values much thought, and even more people will fail to live a life that is consistent with what they say they value the most. And so if we're not living by our values, then we're not engaging in the behaviors that will enable us to win in the things that matter most, and so there'll be no winning for us. So we talked about how important it is that we identify our values and that we, again, absolutely, positively live by those values, even though most people won't. Third week, we talked about how it is we know we're winning. And we said that the temptation is to make some sort of external measure, something everybody sees, easily measured, so that we can feel good about ourselves. And we said several things present themselves. Money, right off the bat. Fitness is another big one in our day and age. I know when my biceps are getting bigger, when my waist is getting smaller, that's a win. Status, job advancement. It's easy to know if more people are reporting to me. And we said the problem with those is that though they provide a lot of satisfaction in the short term, that kind of external focus doesn't provide long-term satisfaction. So very satisfying in the short term, easy win to identify, makes us feel good about ourselves, but in the long term doesn't provide the kind of satisfaction we're looking for. And even worse, that kind of external focus distracts us from the intangible things, the immeasurable things like relationships that are what really matter, which life is really all about. And so they actually focus in the wrong direction. And so we said, rather than choosing external measures for winning, What we need to do is we need to develop an inner life. And I went so far as to suggest that what we really need to do is develop an actual spiritual life. And that the way we know is within this spiritual life is that we stand before God and know that we're doing the work that God has given us to do. And if we know that that is the case, then no matter what else is happening, what anybody else says, we know we're doing good work. If we don't know that, we're going to be driven mercilessly. And we're probably not going to be as good to the people around us who would like to be. When we know we're doing good work, when we know we can stand before God, be doing what it is God has called us to do, that frees us up to find peace and just love the people around us. So we talked about how important it is to develop that inner life, that spiritual life, where we know who we are, we know who God is, we know the opportunities are before us, and we're being faithful to them. Today, we're going to finish the series with a simple statement, and really the whole sermon is just this. If you can make any changes in your life whatsoever, and I mean changes that stick over the long haul. Lots of people make changes for a month, for a year, for 5 years, and maybe they're really good for 10 years, but in 15 years, they're right back where they started. If you can make any changes for the long haul, any changes at all, you're probably winning in life, because it is so hard for people to really change. People make short-term changes, but man, because there's something painful happening, once the pain is gone, they just go right back to that old behavior. Jesus had a very graphic description for this. He talked about how dogs return to their vomit. And that's always stuck out with me, A, because it's gross, so it just kind of stuck in my head. But second of all, because it's just so dang true. And it just, over the years, I've seen so many people, even in my own life, as much as I hate to admit it, there's that tendency to get things right when they're causing me some pain, but once the pain is gone, just go right back to the behaviors that were so destructive in the first place. And I think this gospel talks about, I think one of the most remarkable things in this gospel is Jesus' acknowledgement that there are some people who just aren't going to change. A lot of people talk about a lot of different things in this gospel. Sometimes people talk about the chasm between the haves and the have-not, not a new problem, a very old problem that needs to be addressed, and Jesus speaks to that, and that's important. Some people talk about that use this as an opportunity to talk about our need to really notice the people around us, to really see the people around us. For instance, to notice that Trevor is wearing a button-down shirt today that's not actually a button-down shirt, and boy, does it look sharp, and just say, Trevor, you're such a, to really notice the people that are around us. And there's a sermon there, and that's an important sermon too, but that's not the sermon we're going to preach today. Some people use this gospel to talk about hell, but remember we said the parables only teach one point, and so the details, you can't push the details, and I think to use those details for in that kind of direction, I think that's misguided and wrong. So we're not going to preach that sermon. But the sermon we are going to preach is that last line, and my reading of this gospel this time, I think this is the most remarkable line in the whole parable, actually. And it's that line where Jesus says, you know what? Even if somebody comes back from the dead, these folks aren't going to change. They're still going to do what they darn well please. And so, what that means is if we just say that Tom has a terrible drinking problem and he gets drunk every night of the week and he's very irresponsible in his family, and I die and I am raised from the dead and I come back up to Tom and Tom says, weren't you dead? And I say, yeah, I was dead. And he says, now you're alive. And I say, yeah, I'm alive. He says, holy cow. I say, get that right. And I said, and I've come back for a special reason. I tell you, Tom, you need to stop drinking. And Tom says, okay. And then he goes and does whatever he darn well pleases. Even if a person is raised from the dead, it appears to some people they're so set in their ways that they're just not going to change no matter what. Can you imagine that? I mean, isn't that remarkable? Isn't that striking? And yet, isn't that true? Isn't that true for you very often? And I know, much to my shame, that that's true for me. And so what I want to do briefly, because the bishop's coming and I need to be able to greet her after the service, and briefly, my definition of brief is maybe a little different than other people's definition of brief, but I'll try to be brief. I'll try to really be brief. I want to talk about 3 areas that people really have a hard time changing in, and there's probably more, and there absolutely are more, and a fascinating discussion. Here's what you can talk about today when you're driving home or around the dinner table or something. Do people really change? A lot of people think people just don't change. Do people really change? Do you know anybody that's changed? What do people struggle with to change in their life? I'm going to talk about 3 things. My wife and I talked about this on the way home last night, and she added a whole bunch more. So you might just talk about that. So we're going to talk about 3 things that people struggle to change, and then we're going to talk about 2 things we can do to change. There's a lot more things that we could talk about. We're going to just limit it to 2 because we're going to try and be brief. Okay, 3 things that don't change. First one, probably right at the very top of the list, is addiction. So many people struggle with addiction in so many ways. And it's the rare person who is actually able to change their life. I mean, people, and probably number one thing that people are addicted to is alcohol, but people are also very addicted to pornography. I can almost guarantee you there are people in this room, just based on the statistics, who struggle with that. And food. I mean, food's, those are sort of the top three things that people really get addicted to is alcohol, substance abuse, pornography, and food. And you say, well, how do you get to food? You have to eat. Well, it's overeating, it's overusing food. And Overeaters Anonymous, they define sobriety by not eating white sugar and white flour. And if we eliminate those from our lives, it makes the difference it makes. And frankly, I am addicted to sugar. And it's not the substance. Sometimes the substance is a problem, but it's the thought process that go along with it. Whenever addiction is present, these thought processes are going to be addictive. And they're destructive processes. That's what makes addiction so destructive. So when I have a spoonful of sugar, let's say that I have a pint of ice cream, I take that first spoonful of ice cream, can I stop? I can't. I mean, the simple truth is I can't. The whole pint's gone, I'm looking for another. And what happens is, I'm this big, tough, strong guy, and I just got beat by a spoonful of sugar. And that makes me feel terrible. It makes me feel ashamed. Whatever it is that beats you, and it makes me feel like I'm not worth very much. And I'm probably not mindful of that. I either got to change, or I'm just going to go on feeling that way. And if I want to keep eating sugar, I can't change. So I just keep feeling worse and worse about myself. And then what I got to do is, since nobody can live that way, I put that feeling bad about me into belittling all of you. And I just start to attack, and I start to belittle, and I start trying to pull down, and I get angry, and I get judgmental, and all this is a way to sort of, all when I'm feeling bad about myself, to lift myself up by dry. You can guarantee these mechanisms will be present, even though people won't be aware of them, or won't admit them. So addiction is one of them. Second one, religious practice. If you never grew up in church and you start going to church, it's going to be a really hard thing to be faithful and going to church week in and week out. And most people will start, and they'll say, yeah, that made my life a whole lot better, and yeah, that really is great, and I need to do that more often, and then they stop. Or if you grew up in a religious tradition, like a Catholic religious tradition, and the Episcopal Church is a Catholic religious tradition, the Roman Catholics aren't the only Catholics, there's Roman Catholics, there's English Catholics. In Catholic traditions, we often understand religion as being like 45 minutes on a Sunday or Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening, and put $20 in the plate, maybe $5 in the plate. And so you do that, 45 minutes here and $5 there, you're done. You're good, you're golden. You've done what God wants you to do. That's religion. And so to move into an understanding of the spiritual life like Jesus understands the spiritual life, where it's about what you do Monday through Saturday that's really important. I mean, this is just the smallest part of that whole thing. It's about our whole life, and it's about our whole life being transformed so that we love our neighbor like we love ourselves. What religion is really about is not church. It's about loving people. It's about becoming a better person. It's about day in and day out expanding our kinship circle so that we care about more and more people like they are the family that they are. In a day and age where the kinship circles are getting smaller and smaller, and people are getting meaner and meaner, and we've never needed what religion has to offer more than we need it now. But if that's not how you've understood religion, you're going to struggle with that. It's going to be really hard to go from being irreligious to being religious. And most people won't be able to do it. And I just speak on history. That's one of the reasons I was so impressed with Zach Cates. And many of you know Zach Cates. Zach has recently moved. But Zach wasn't religious growing up. The church wasn't an important part of their life. He was a family man. He was busy. He was rising in his career. He had an extreme work ethic, all these sorts of things. And he started coming to church, and he stuck with it. And week in and week out, unless good reason prevented, Zach was here. You could count on him being here. And that's a change that he made, and he knew in every way, shape, or form his life was better for it. He was a better father. He was a better husband. He was a better human being because he didn't just work. He started going on mission trips. He started doing service projects. He started to give back. He got involved in a small group. I mean, it just made a huge difference in every area of his life. And he knew that, and the people around him knew that. But that, friends, that's the exception rather than the rule. And then the third area that people have a hard time changing is consumption. What Jesus talks about in the parable today, that strikes really close to home. We love to consume, we love our stuff, we love our things, we love our lifestyle, and it doesn't matter if Jesus comes up and says, you're a greedy son of a gun. We say, thank you very much, shut up, Jesus. This is how I like to live. All right, so yeah, I know there's a lot of starving people in the world, but that's their problem, and I'm going to go have my nice sumptuous meal. I'm going to go have my pint of very expensive ice cream right now. Yes, that's exactly right. And there's a thought experiment that's done. And Ron Sider, that's who did it. And it's the way it says, I'm going to embellish a little bit, but he says, in the drainage pond out there, a big storm comes in and fills up with water. You come to church, you're in your best clothes, you bought a suit because the bishop's coming, and you want to look your best, and you shine your shoes, and you have some extra money because, you know, the bishop takes an offering for a discretionary fund, you want to put some in there. And you see this kid out in the puddle, and they're struggling, and they're drowning, they're all caught up in the weeds that are out there, and they're going down for the last time, a 3-year-old from the neighborhood. What's your moral obligation? Do you save that kid? It's your moral obligation, right? Absolutely. It doesn't matter if you wreck the suit. Doesn't matter if you ruin your shoes. Doesn't matter if you lose your wallet, it goes down the sewer, you lose all that money. Your moral obligation is to save that kid no matter what, right? We all agree on that? All right. The thought experiment is there are children in that predicament all over the world. There are children in worse predicaments like that all over the whole world, and you and I can do something to save them. It just means living a little bit more simply, not consuming at the level we consume, amping down our lifestyle just a little bit. But we don't. Do we have the same moral obligation to those kids we have as a kid out there? We absolutely do. Logically, we do, but we're not logical creatures. And so we want to live our life, and so even though we might know the truth about consumption, even we know that consuming at the level we do damages the planet in some way, shape, or form, that it damages relationships, that it creates these inequities, that damage social structure, even though we know all this stuff, we don't change. Because we like to consume. It's a tremendously hard one to change. Okay, so 3 areas that people have a hard time changing, and I'm right there with you. I'm not preaching at you, man. You could preach this to me, and I would sit there and say, yep, you're right, that's me. Yep, you're right, that's me. Yep, you're right, that's me. But how do we change? Well, I think the gospel gives us a tip to that. There's so much more we could say. But I think we have to acknowledge that there's a power higher than ourselves. I don't think anybody changes without the help of a power higher than themselves. And I think people in recovery know that. And I think they know it better than most of us do. And I think that's why they recover and why we don't. So the power higher than ourselves is sometimes the community. It's to be part of a community. When you're part of a community, you submit to that community. This is what Jesus says when he says, there's Moses and the prophets. If they're not listening to them, they're not going to listen to anybody. Moses and the prophets define the local synagogue community. And so for a person to go into that, there's an ethical system that says take care of the poor. And if they submit to that community, then that whole community is going to be about taking care of the poor. But if they don't submit to that community, if they just leave there and say, oh, that was nice, going to do, nope, they're not going to listen to anybody do it. So if we really want to change the higher power we got to submit to something. Sam Keen, who wrote the book Fire in the Belly, who is not a Christian but who had deep admiration for Jesus, said the genius of Jesus was that men always define themselves by their conquests, by military conquests, by the conquest at work, by sexual conquest, by all kinds of conquests. And they said the genius of Jesus said that we don't define our masculinity by our conquests, but by that to which we submit. And that to which we submit is what really defines the quality of our life. And that's the secret here, submitting to a power greater than ourselves. And that's the community, the values of the community, and what the community says is true. And what people want to say is, I'm not like them. You know, the person who struggles with alcohol and says, I'm not like them. They're addicts, I'm not. You know, they're doing this, I'm not. They've destroyed everything, I haven't. And meanwhile, everybody else all around them says, oh, you're just like them. But they just don't see that. The person who says to Christians, says, you know what, you guys, your religion's a crutch. You got some kind of problem, that's why you need religion. I got it together, I don't need a religion. And I say, no, you got it right. I mean, but when you're crippled, you need a crutch. And I'm crippled in all kinds of ways. I need help. I need all the help I can get. Guess what? You're crippled too. And you got a crutch in it, whether you admit it or not, you got a crutch of some form in your life present also. And it probably isn't as helpful as this one is. So sure, this is a crutch. But when you're crippled, you need a crutch. And it's part of what helps me to walk. But as long as we say, I'm not crippled, I don't need help, I'm not like those people, they're all deluding themselves, then we're never going to change, of course. We're never going to get the help we need. So we got to submit to a power higher than ourselves. And then the second power higher than ourselves is God. You know I believe in a personal God. I know this God through Jesus Christ. Many of you believe in God in a different way. Zach, for instance, never was quite sure he believed in God, but in my last conversation with him, he said, and I thought this was remarkable, and I think he was really onto something. He said, you know, I still don't know if I believe, but then he paused and said, or maybe I do believe, and believing just means something different than I always thought it did. I really like that. I think he was on to something. And so, however we conceive of God, somewhere along the line, God has spoken to you. Not literally, but some way, shape, or form, whether it's the power behind the universe, whether it's being in harmony with whatever it is, you've had a sense of what's right and what's wrong. Right? I've had that sense. And we either listen to it or we don't. The rich man, the first time he saw Lazarus laying out there, you can bet a voice said in his head, look at all that food you got. That poor guy out there, send your handmaid out there with the leftovers. Give him a little bit of something. And did he listen? He said, nah, pass me the dessert. And every time we don't listen to that, however we understand it, something inside us hardens. Something inside us begins to shrivel. Something inside us begins to die. And people begin to implode. And they begin to be deformed. And it's a tragic process when we don't submit to, and people don't change. They just become more and more of what they are. And as people age, and of course what I do, you watch people age, when people become more and more of what they are, sometimes that's a beautiful thing, sometimes it is a terrible thing. And so if we're gonna change, man, we gotta submit to a power, however you understand God, however God speaks to you. When God speaks, listen. If you don't, something inside you is gonna harden and die. Something inside me is gonna harden and die, and we're gonna become deformed, ugly things that in the end may not really even be human at all. Maybe more like animals. So these three areas, is there one of these you struggle with? And if so, what steps can you take? What community, how can you be more engaged in the community around you, get the support you need? Is there somebody you can talk to, somebody you can share with? Do you just simply need to be more present in that community? Could you, in some way, shape, or form, deepen your relationship with God, come to Alpha, say a prayer? What steps can you take in some way, shape, or form that will actually help you make the changes that you know you need to make? Because if you make them, everybody else will be better off for it. If you make those changes, that, in my book, friends, is a win. And it just may be the most important win of all. Amen? Amen.